everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here for once again the Sea to Summit, but this time the retrospective with Greg Brewer and Chris Carpenter. We have an awesome lineup. Really excited about this lineup for sure, especially some of the older wines, the wines that we don't get to see a lot with the 2009 Nisa Chardonnay from Brewer-Clifton and that 2005 Lokoya Merlot. So really get to see what our great winemakers thought about that particular vintage and what they went through, the struggles, the wins, and those kinds of things as they were growing these two particular wineries of ours. And want to thank you once again for all your time, for everyone who's been here. We definitely have noticed a couple names that we've seen who were at the last one. So forgive us if there's, maybe a story or two that is repeated, but great stories are worth repeating. My name's Ryan Hughes. I am the estate manager at Spire Calistoga and Spire Healdsburg on the Sonoma side. Many of you know me, many of you don't, but once again, quick little intro there. We will have, for the people that did take advantage and have the wine already at their houses or wherever they're enjoying these wines, we're going to start with the 2009 Chardonnay. Then we're going to go to the 2012 3D Pinot Noir. Then we will go to the Mount Brave 2013 Cabernet Franc, and then finish off with the 2005 Lokoya Merlot. So that is the four wines that we'll have here. This is an open forum, so please feel free. Use that chat function on the side there or open up the chat. We will be looking at, we will try to get to all your questions and have them all answered. But this is just kind of a fun free flow between the two winemakers and you all. So once again, thank you so much. And with that, I'm going to throw this to Greg Brewer, who's going to start us off with the 2009 Nisa Chardonnay.
All right, thank you so much for that gracious intro. Thank you all for joining us tonight. On behalf of Jackson family and Spire Collection and Chris and myself and everyone who was so instrumental to put this together and to promote it and to execute. Thank you. It's a beautiful opportunity, for me selfishly. I love this, to be able to interact with Chris and kind of share things with you all. We both really enjoy, and we're here at your service. We're here for you. So anything that we can share or kind of touch on or go deeper with, please let us know, because that's, all this is for you. And that's that. So for some of you who joined us last time, and thank you for that, we started near the end of the conversation. We started talking about kind of different things, like the role in literature as far as inspiration in our work and what motivates us. And a lot of those elements kind of together, and it's saying my internet connection's unstable. So if I disappear, it can be the Carpenter show. It's raining like heck down here and it's freezing. So that's also why I'm kind of like trembling. So anyway, today we each selected, two wines, from each of us, obviously. And they have different meaning. And I think it's going to be really, hopefully the path we'll take with these wines are more personal in nature, and certainly not super technical, because we didn't do that last time and there's no intent of doing that this time. So it's really a cool opportunity, I think, to learn more about what's in Chris's head and really kind of celebrating certain pivotal moments, and the stories and the drive behind that work. So that's that. So kicking it off, because our wines are lighter. I'm always the opening band for Carp, which is totally an honor. We're going to start with the 2009 Nisa Chardonnay. For those of you that have it, and for those of you that don't, that's fine too. Because the stories with the two wines that I selected are not universal, but they're more all-encompassing in some ways. So for us, we started this project in '96, right? And so in 2009, we were about 14 years in. And we started a farming company in 2005, right? Which I never thought we would do. I'm like an LA kid, latchkey kid. I grew up on like mac and cheese. I didn't know seasons existed, so the fact that I was part of like a farming company is really funny, but that's just how the trajectory of this project went. And so we took over a vineyard called Mount Carmel in 2005. We started our farming company. It was 2 people. A used forklift. We got like hand-me-down bird netting from Sea Smoke next door. I mean, it was super bad news bears, but we pieced it all together and we made it work. And then, during that time too, right, Sideways happened, right? So Sideways is jamming, and like, just it was a really pretty euphoric time, like '05 through about '08, '09, right? So it was this kind of hyper confident, really euphoric time. And during that era, in 2007, we met a beautiful gentleman named Lee Nisa. And his family came to our area here in Santa Rita Hills in 1916. And so, Lee, so it's basically, knocking on the door of 100 years at that point. And it's so sweet. And he has this 4-acre vineyard. I'd heard of it, but you don't really see it. It's tiny, it's in sand, like, planted by hand, kind of crooked rows, self-rooted, very cool, right? And he approached us about getting the fruit in '07, and we could do no wrong, right? So it's like, oh yeah, sure, we'll grab it. That's fine. But like, he wanted more than that. He wanted like relationship. He wanted that trust and confidence. And so we met, we talked, he dug us, he understood our ethos. And so he entrusted us with his fruit. And then in '08, we started farming it kind of with him. And it was a built up confidence for sure. And then in 2009, we were able to assume the responsibility of his land, ultimately these 4 acres, which amounted to like 5 or 6 tons worth of Chardonnay, which is what this wine is. So I wanted to share that today because it really, it's about like entrusting us with their land, yeah, and also like, entrusting us with taking over their farming practice. And it's an old Swiss farming family that had done row crops and cattle and all kinds of things. And so just that kind of, that feeling towards us is super, super important and responsible. And it's also the first time that like we were entrusted in that capacity with someone else's family name, right? And that's a huge deal. For me, I talk about this with some frequency. Having our own name on a label is not that big of a deal ultimately, right? If the wine is weird or something goes south, you have yourself to look at in the mirror and, be bummed out, but like, that's it. You put like Santa Rita Hills on a label, that's a big deal, right? Because it's your whole neighborhood. You put someone else's family's legacy's name on a label, and it's a super, super big deal. So I wanted to celebrate with you all today, the Nisa family, and also something with this wine, there's something always very kind of glacial and super transparent, which also is kind of woven into the relationship that we shared with them, which I thought would be kind of cool. So again, it's a purely sand site facing the north, clone 4 shard, self-rooted. It was planted in the mid '90s. And yeah, that's that.
Hey, Greg, can I ask you a question?
Yes, you may, Chris.
So this is how this is going to work. He and I are going to ask each other questions and try to figure each other out because we can't. Normally, we'd be doing this at a bar and enjoying each other's company. But given today's world, this is the best way to do it. Greg, you talk a lot about trust there, and I know that some of the ways that you think about your influences, and as winemakers, we're all influenced by different things that drive us into winemaking. Music happens to be one of the big things that I think about when I put wines together. My history in my sense of history and literature. I know that Greg, it was French literature, right? That was what you are. And you talk a lot about trust and how do those two things combine as you thought about these wines and the development of these wines and the development of your brands in general.
Yeah, well, I think, it's something that you brought up last time, and at the very end, you asked about the role of literature in kind of informing what we do. And I thought about it a lot, and I'd never been posed the question in that way. And it's not, for me, it's not a specific author or book or something that really moved me. But when I was still in school, I was really, my main field of interest was letter exchange, right? And and that can be anything. It can be you have a crush on a girl or boy when you're in third grade and you pass notes in class, or you text now or do something different, or Snapchat or whatever, but you pass notes in class, and I love when you devote an emotion to something, you commit an emotion to something, and then you ultimately don't control the outcome. You don't control the response from that person, right? You have hopes, maybe you might have expectations, but you don't control it. You just do your best to kind of unveil yourself and to be, vulnerable with that entity. And then you hope for the best, right? And I love that anticipation. I love that vulnerability ultimately. So that's kind of how we do wines, we have confidence in a place, we give it our all, but then the result is the result. Like we really don't do anything to try to steer or alter the outcome of that, much like we wouldn't, you're powerless as far as controlling the response from the recipient of the outreach. You know what I mean?
You could probably say that about creativity and people that create things and are looking for that response. That's something that for me, one of the great rewards of what we do is seeing people respond to that. And our craft, our art is really, it's in the moment oftentimes. Whereas, a lot of art is, but a lot of art, film, recorded music, printed art, literature, those things last forever. Ours doesn't. So grasping onto that moment of joy that you see in people's faces, they're tasting something is crucial. And you're talking about letters. I just wanted to, I don't know if you ever read any books that were dedicated to letters, but if you ever have, or if you do have the desire, I would highly recommend a book by Hunter Thompson. This great gonzo journalist. He wrote a book called Proud Highways, and he was a prolific letter writer. He wrote everyone, from his mother to his teachers, all the way up to presidents, as he became more and more that type of thinker. And the letters are they're fantastic. And you can see his journey in the letter writing. Again, and I think that has a corollary to what we do, because, we were just chatting about some of those old pictures that got posted of us. And that journey and our development as winemakers has been quite fascinating. And Greg and I have known each other for a lot of years, going back to a visit that we had at Kapalua some years ago for a wine festival. And seeing our journeys and how we've developed has been fun as well. So anyway, I diverge. Please.
No, thanks for that recommendation. No, I can't wait. That's a great tip. I can't wait to read that. So, shifting now into the 3D Pinot.
Greg, real quick.
Yeah, please.
I had someone privately ask me, what do you remember about the 2009 vintage? What was great about it? What was hard about it?
Well, it was interesting. It was a colder year down here, and we're coming off of the euphoria of like 2000 through 2007, really. And then 2008, we had some frost, and we were farming our own things, and so that frost, it cost us $1 zillion. That really, really hurt us financially. And then 2009, it was cold, and then my assistant at another winery had some personal issues during harvest, and so that made the harvest time pretty complicated. I was navigating some personal stuff. So it was a colder year, and it was a year where I think I relied on work to control something, because a lot of things were out of my control. So the wines were pretty pretty tight-fisted, I think, when they were young. So that's one thing too, raising these wines, we can, even though, the intent is always to be super like quiet with the upbringing, when you're as kind of deep into it and as passionate as Chris and I are, I think it would be really hard sometimes to completely extricate one's like emotions, you know what I mean? During the course of the upbringing of these wines. I think it does play a subtle role for sure. Yeah, beautiful question. And then shifting quick to the Pinot, I want to make sure there's enough time for questions and certainly enough time for Chris's wines, because I want to.
There's a killer gunpowder character in this wine. Where's that coming from?
Probably a lot of things. There's no, the barrels are like 20 years old. There's no mallow. I mean, the wines are very stark. And so I think there's an opportunity to see things that remain, right? And so, we work with, we've only used a yeast called Montrachet here, which is a little bit reductive. It can be a little bit of that kind of weird minerally under your skin something that I've always found really compelling. We don't stir it or anything else, but I mean, it just sits on those. And so that it could be a little bit of that. Yeah.
Really awesome.
Thanks. Yeah, and then Pinot Noir, it's the 3D. So 2012, a big, powerful vintage. The reason why I picked 3D was, again, reflecting on heritage and history and certain things like that. So 3D is the first vineyard that we planted. We planted 3D in 2007. Again, kind of these glory years of like, having the money to do it and feeling super confident, as a lot of us did in the world back in 07. And so anyway, so we planted this vineyard, we moved into this building. It was like a graduation year for us in some ways, 07 was. And we leased this land called 3D, and we were going to plant exclusively Chardonnay there. It's very, very sandy. We put in 5 clones of Chardonnay. We knew that would be like our core Chardonnay spot. And then the landlord from whom we leased this land for the next 30 or 40 years, they really wanted Pinot on the property. And I was like, well, okay, like we really need a Chardonnay vineyard because there's Pinot all over the place because of sideways, being people planting. But it was going to be like a deal breaker on this land lease. And so I said, okay, cool. Like we'll do 3 acres of Pinot, that's fine. So, but a very, very sandy site. It's one where I normally Pinot would not be the first thing that would come to mind, like on the eastern side of the appellation, very, very sandy. And I thought, okay, well, we're going to kind of go against the grain a bit. And this will work. It's going to be cool, but let's make sure that this is like a very unique kind of different parcel. And so the parent material for the vines were kind of legacy clones in California. One's called Pomard and one's called Swan. So this is equal parts of those two, what I call like old school clones, as compared to a lot of the wines that you all might have from us, like from the western side of the valley, and clones that are a bit darker and denser. These are a bit more ethereal and more transparent. Again, I thought that would be a neat match with the Nisa. And all whole cluster fermented, 100%, right? So I think the goal here, like with sand and Pinot, you get kind of lift and perfume and transparency, but you don't really get color, and you don't get that like fatty bottom end base. You know what I mean? It's just like this kind of like, it's like this headier, ethereal thing. And it's the older clonal material, which is also kind of lighter than what a lot of people are installing these days, and whole cluster. So this is kind of like harkening back to like an older California, really, and paying homage in a lot of ways to Swan and, the Pomard selection. And so I thought that would be of interest to do that. So a big, powerful vintage, but kind of a transparent, sandy, kind of lighter, spicy thing. And I think I just tasted it quick. I haven't had this for a while, but for me, it kind of is doing what it should be doing. I think it's like that. There's a stemmy, spicy thing that's a bit louder than most of our wines these days, anyway. But it reminds me of like our older wines. And Chris, maybe you can speak to this, but it reminds me when I hear people talk about like old Napa Valley, where the Bordelaise varieties might carry a little more kind of the herbal edge, you know what I mean, as compared to a kind of a more generous fruit forward thing. This Pinot kind of almost seems like that parallel, you know what I mean? That's how I see it.
I'm sorry, Greg, I missed. When was the first vintage of the 3D?
We planted in 07 and the first one was 09. Yeah.
How are those 09s? Have you tasted any of those recently?
The Chardonnay, yeah, Chardonnay is cool. And the Pinot's kind of like this one. Yeah.
So question for you, Greg, now that we've got kind of those going, the one is, how long, a cooler year with the 2009 there, how long do you think, and it's so vibrant, it's so clean, I really enjoy it. How long do you think you could shelf it? When you wanted to know?
Yeah, the Chardonnays for us are the longest lived of anything that comes off this campus. So, the diatom Chardonnay that we do in steel, that's why it's 35 degrees in this room right now. The diatom Chardonnay is really the longest lived from kind of historic experience from me, followed by the BC Chards. And the Pinots, their trajectory is a little bit slower. I mean, a little bit faster, somewhat surprisingly, I guess. It's not like they go fast by any stretch, but the Chardonnays at 20 and 25 years are still very like lime green, bright yellow. You know what I mean? They don't really show that many signs at all of any kind of degradation. And the Pinots at 15 to 25 years kind of get a little brickish. They feel a touch more fragile. But I'd probably give the Chardonnays like an extra 10 on it. So what, this is 09. I mean, I think this wine in 10 or so years would be totally fine. And it's already, what, 12 years old? Yeah, so that's how you see that.
Super cool wine. I mean, it floored me when I tried it for the first time, just how much life was in it. But and looking forward to maybe trying it 10 years from now for sure, if there's any left. But the other one, this is more of a kind of an inside baseball question, a little bit about, maybe the business more than anything. And both Chris and Greg on this one. What's the decision-making process on behalf of you when it comes to making a style like this, or something that's like oaky buttery, kind of a full malolactic? I mean, what's the decision process when you are going to pick this Chardonnay?
Well, for Brewer-Clifton, we don't change anything. So back in '96, we kind of set forth on an aesthetic path from which we've never wavered. The only refinement really is that at the beginning we employed about 20% new oak, and then by 07 we were down to 0. And we've been all neutral for the past 15 years. But other than that, it's the exact same. Comparable picking parameters, only this appellation, neutral oak, same yeast, no stirring, really no mallow. So there's no variance. It's about like not being a judge of anything and raising everything that same way. And that was that path we set upon just based on other things we had been doing professionally, I guess. And then it was like, oh, Brewer-Clifton's direction will be this. And then that's how it all started. Which brings
Wait a second, you can't just say that and tell us what it was that drove you there. There was some other things going on, and then what were the other things? What kind of drove you to that?
Well, there was, at the time, there were a lot of Chardonnays that were being raised, with more new oak and with mallow. And when I was trained, that was kind of the rule of thumb for like qualitative Chardonnay. That's what you would do. And so we kind of wanted to reinterpret that a little bit. And we wanted to be very hands off. At first it was all hand bottling and only gravity, and, it was super, super touchy feely, very short hose transit. And so the concept of like stirring lees or doing different things seemed a little bit intrusive as far as what motivated us, I guess. And so we settled in pretty quickly or immediately to like a kind of more reserved style, and also picking riper, right? So kind of knowing that we always could because the weather's so good here. So coming in with more horsepower of fruit, right? With more kind of power and viscosity and fruit, and then raising the wine with a kind of a tighter lens. That's how we did it.
Very cool.
Yeah, so that's that. And then that now brings us to the Mount Brave. And I can't wait to hear from you, Chris, like the genesis of this. Starting something, from the label design.
I have one more question for you. I was a latchkey kid myself, and macaroni and cheese was one of my foundations, that and toast. So I got to ask you, how many different ways did you come up with to make mac and cheese? Because I had like a dozen recipes that I would mess around with.
I was never that smart. So I always do things the same, brother. It was like the same mac and cheese and this old like avocado green spaghetti colander in the 70s, like those half moon ones. And then the cots with the copper bottom and the plastic handle. And then it was all about like not burning myself. Like that was the main objective. And if I made it through that impasse, then I was good to go. The orange powder and I was set.
Yeah. I don't know what I would have done without those two staples in my life. So the wines that I chose today were significant. I believe that wine, is so many things to so many people, and one of the real key aspects of wine are the stories that are tied into each and every bottle, and the stories that wine is a story from the moment it's planted. Into the season that it resides in before we pick it, to what happens during that particular time of fermentation and then how it ages and all the decisions that go in there. And it's a snapshot. It's a snapshot in time. And it's something that you, as winemakers, we reflect on those things. And, different years and different bottlings have different meanings to us. And some are more, they ring or resonate with us for a longer time. And these two wines are high in that pantheon for me of wines that have meant things to me. And we're going to talk about ciders in a very different way in a minute when we get to that Merlot. But the Cab Franc that we have, so Mount Brave is one of the wines that I make here in Napa Valley. And Mount Brave was a project that Jess Jackson, our founder, started. It was, in fact, his last project that he started. And it was a project of love for him because he had always wanted to create a brand and a winery on Mount Veeder that was its own entity. I make another wine called Lokoya, and under Lokoya, I make 4 wines from 4 different mountains, and Veeder is one of them. And Veeder was one of Jess's favorite places to grow and to taste Cabernet from. So when we bought what was then the Chateau Patel vineyard, which was contiguous with our vineyard, which is Veeder Peak, there were some other varieties on that property. We had Malbec, Merlot, Syrah, Zin. Any of you that are in our Mountain Wine Club have had the opportunity to taste a number of those wines. The Zin doesn't make it out to anybody but the Mountain Wine Club, and you have to get a hold of Ryan to get a hold of that. There was also Chardonnay on this particular property, and Jess didn't want to produce a Mount Veeder Chardonnay. He wanted a Bordeaux variety. And the Chardonnay was planted in a part of the vineyard for a very good reason. The woman who oversaw the planting and the winemaking for Chateau Patel is one of the great characters in the wine world, one of the great human beings I know, Marquetta Formeau. And she has a real sense of the vineyard and where and why you want to plant certain things in certain places. And she planted this Chardonnay because in this particular area, because it's one of the cooler spots in the vineyard. And it's cool mostly because it's right up against a ridgeline, and right on that ridgeline is a stand of Doug firs that during the latter part of the day completely shade this vineyard. So then Jess comes to me and says, listen, we don't want Chardonnay. Figure out one of the Bordeaux varieties to plant there. And, I went back and forth between Merlot and Cab Franc. And we didn't have a lot of Cab Franc on these properties. In fact, we had one little block that we had inherited with this property, but it was in a super, super cold place. And it was really green and didn't have what I thought would take it to the next level. I thought this place would, this block on the Mount Brave Vineyard. And we went ahead and planted Cab Franc in 2010 in this particular area. And it was a roll of the dice because I knew Marquetta had made a really crucial decision in putting Chardonnay there. And a lot of these decisions are made on ripening times. When does Chardonnay ripen? Well, Chardonnay ripens fairly early. Cab Franc ripens fairly early. And I had gained some experience with Cab Franc because of the Lokoya wines that I was making and just some awesome Cab Franc blocks on Howell Mountain across the valley in very cool spots in the Lokoya and the Keys Vineyard. So we put the Cab Franc in there, and 3 years later, in 2013, of which this wine is the 2013, the vines matured enough to get a sense of what we could do with Cab Franc, and I was thrilled. I had thankfully made the right decision and had put a really great combination of a rootstock and a scion in this area that did exceptionally well and created a corollary for me of the Cab Francs that we were making on Howell Mountain on Mount Veeder, such that I proposed to our marketing team and our ownership. Just had passed by this time, but why don't we put a Cab Franc in a bottle in much the same way that we have a Cab Franc from Lokoya? And they went for it. And this wine is that wine. We created this from that very first, and that was also an unusual thing. Typically, vines, as they're growing up, that first 2 years, like in 11 and 12, you get very little crop, maybe nothing in 11, maybe a wee bit in 12. And then in 13, we probably had about 3/4 of the vineyard that was producing. It doesn't really mature fully into like year 4, 5, and 6. And then the vines are also kind of trying to find their stride, if you will. They're acclimating themselves to their environment, the farming regime that we're putting them under. So in the first year of a crop that you can actually put into a wine, you really don't think, you don't get fully committed to the idea that you're going to be able to make a wine. But again, when you figure out the right combination of place and rootstock and cyan, and it works, oftentimes you're surprised by creating a wine that really works. And this one worked. And I'm very proud of that block because it was a roll of the dice. It was my decision, and it worked. And I didn't have to do any backtracking, which is always crucial. Anyway, so.
Real quick question on that. Real quick question, Chris, on that. Having, unfortunately, I'd never had the opportunity to meet Jess, and that's something that saddens me on a big level, because of what our relationship now, and at the same time, there's something very mythical about him, which is a cool thing, because it's. I knew from everything I've always heard, he's like bigger than life. And now he's like really bigger than life in my eyes. And I'm trying to envision like the two of you together, like because you two are very commanding and very competent and accomplished. So those conversations, how were they? Was it like, how did those go?
They went great. They did. My thing about compelling people and people that I have the opportunity to learn from. We all have the opportunity to learn from each other. And I just read something Warren Buffett, my wife forwarded on a thing that Warren Buffett said, and he said, go to bed every night having learned something and listened to somebody that day. And that's one of his recipes for success. And that question really resonates right now. And by way of that, Jess had a tremendous amount of vision. And when you're around visionaries, the way they think is really compelling and inspiring. And I learned a lot from him, and I would listen to him. I mean, it was also Jess, so you had to listen to him. He would also ask questions, and he really trusted me with this vineyard. When he created Mount Brave, he took myself into the room, my wife, who was a label designer, who actually created the Mount Brave label, and our then GM, a guy named Ed Farver. And he goes, I want you three to create this wine. Chris, I want you to make the wine and oversee the vineyard. Tina, I want you to design the label. And Ed, you make sure they get the money to do it. And don't bring in any marketing people. Because he was afraid that marketing would change it and create some whatever they do. Ultimately, marketing came in and they've done a fabulous job with this brand. But just that, that moment, I'll never forget sitting in that room having Jess tell me that and realizing, oh God, that's a sacred trust. And it was, again, his last project. So this project is near and dear to my heart. And I'm really proud of again, the work that we've all done from a marketing standpoint, our sales guys that love this brand, and our, our vineyard and winery team, and the work that we've done for that.
So Chris, great question by Rick. He wanted to know, by the way, there are some marketing people listening and watching right now, Chris, just FYI. Rick's question, fantastic question. Since the 2013, the first vintage of the Cabernet Franc, what have you noticed? Like, what have you seen now with, the vintages coming forward, the 14, the 17, what have you noticed as these vines are growing?
Yeah, so, well, a couple of things. one of my tenets of winemaking, it kind of goes back to a little bit what Greg was saying, let the kind of fruit speak for itself and express itself more than what you're doing as a winemaker. And we work really hard to do that. And we also work hard to make sure that the wines express the place that they're from. And you do that under the auspices of the characters that are basic to the variety. So as that vineyard has continued to develop, it's become really hyper-focused on what it means to be Cab Franc and what it means to be Mount Veeder. In fact, I was tasting the 2019s earlier today and going through those wines, and it's amazing because the way I taste is I taste all the Malbecs that I make, all the Merlots that I make, all the Cab Francs that I make, and then all the Cabernets, and then I break them up by the individual appellations on the way. So with Cab Franc, I have 4 different mountains that I'm making Cab Franc, and the Veeder Cab Franc, of which this is Mount Brave Veeder, it is so Veeder. It's got all that aromatic, the floral aromatic, the spice, the that backbone of tannin, and it shows that every year. It's just gotten even more intense as the years have gone on. It's also gotten a little more challenging to farm because there's a little bit of a problem that we have with a disease that's starting to creep in there. That's what's called red blotch, which we didn't know that we had initially, which slows the ripening process down. Now that's an okay thing in Cab Franc, only because it does ripen a little bit early. It just extends that ripening a little bit longer, and that becomes somewhat of a challenge, but it's worked out thus far because we're still bringing it in way before the Cabernet. And in years, again, like 2017, where we didn't have a lot of fruit because of the fires, we got that Cab Franc in early, and that 2017 was the year of Cab Franc because of that.
So how do you think it's going to age, though, Chris, when it comes to this Cab Franc? I have a personal opinion. I think it's very much like Nebbiolo in a cool way. Well, how do you think it's going to age?
Wow. So it's going to age for 40 years like Nebbiolo?
Give or take.
Wow. I think it'll age in much the same way. The tannins in Cab Franc are very similar to the tannins in Cabernet Sauvignon. They're a little bit more angular, if you will. They're oftentimes not as broad, but those tannins are, and being in the mountains, these wines are going to age fine. And I could see why you would say Nebbiolo because of that combination. And yeah, you're right. Nebbiolo tannins tend to be a little bit more focused versus those like Howell Mountain broad tannins. So yeah, 15 years, you'll still be showing fruit. 20 years, you'll probably still be showing fruit. And then it'll start to evolve into more of those tertiary characters that will be as compelling as well, Oh.
I love that you, when you were talking about your tasting this morning, I love that you were talking about your 4 mountains of Cab Franc, like with your huge booming voice. It sounded like God or something. It was like, my 4 mountains of Cabernet Franc. It was awesome.
I'm very lucky.
I'm sold, but I'm in.
Well, you can, and I'll do a little commercial by way of one of the new wines that I'm making that, again, Ryan is the guy to talk to. So we're taking those 4 different areas of Cab Franc and now making a wine called Caledon, which is a combination of these 4 really incredible mountain appellations from the view of Cabernet Franc and how all of them can play together. And it's a blast making that wine. And one of the things that, and Greg, I'm sure you agree, and I think Sonia's on this as well. Winemakers, I wish I could ferment everything. There's so many things that I want to see after you've fermented, how they turn out. I'm relegated to mostly Bordeaux grape varieties. I make a little Syrah, a little Zin, Chardonnay. And having that diversity, being able to create, Cabernet being the main source of the attention that my wines get, but then being able to show, wow, we can ferment these other varieties and create wines with as much of the interest and complexity and exploration as any of the Cabernets, and that's always cool, you know. In fact, I drank one of Sonia's wines the other night, one of the Grenaches, and it was, you know how much I love those wines. Anyway,
yeah, she doesn't need any more fuel as far as confidence in making more different things. So la 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 la. Just kidding.
So the moving on. So Greg was talking about Sideways, and you know this story's getting old, but it is still a important part of the story of the next wine. Sideways hit and Merlot tanked. And Greg was like positioned perfectly with Pinot Noir down in that part of the world where that movie was based. But Merlot up here on the North Coast, suddenly we had a lot of Merlot around the North Coast and nobody was wanting it anymore. Then there was a lot of really bad Merlot and a lot of that went away as a result of Sideways. But what we're left with these really great spots around the Napa Valley, and that's my world. There's plenty over in Sonoma as well, but around Napa Valley that were where Merlot should be planted. And I am always about the underdog. And Merlot at that time was the underdog. But I also realized that, yeah, they're underdogs, but they are in the best spots in Napa Valley for growing Merlot. And there's absolutely no reason that Merlot should be owned as a category by the French and the Italians. That we have places in other spots in the world. Here in California, I make a wine called Hickenbotham in Australia that we have a Merlot at, that Merlot could do just as well. And again, have that complexity, that ageability, that weight, that exploration that I mentioned with Cabernet. So we have had Merlot on Howell Mountain since 1994. And the Merlot that we were making up there typically went to as blenders. We didn't create any Merlots that were standalone. We bought the Lokoya winery in 2005. And 2005, when we had it, Lokoya had a single block Cabernet that was called Anniversary. It had the Cabernet that was a blend of all the other blocks, and then I modified it to make it a Bordeaux blend. So it's got all 5 of the varieties of Bordeaux interweaved into that wine. At the time, it had a Cab Franc, which we've talked about. And in the past, it's had a Petit Syrah, it's had a Chardonnay, may have had a Riesling for 1 or 2 years. There was a whole slew of wines, but it never had a Merlot. And Jess wanted to have a stamp on this brand that was his and his alone. So he came to me and he said, Chris, I want you to think about a wine to create under Lokoya that's never been done under Lokoya. I was dying to bring that Petit Syrah back because those Lokoya Petit Syrahs are killer. And if you ever find any of those wines out in the world, buy them because they're fabulous, fabulous wines. He didn't want anything to do with that idea. We had the Merlot on Keys, which is our vineyard from '94, and we had a couple blocks of Merlot on the Lokoya vineyard, and they were very different. The Keys vineyard, which is 1 mile down the road, is a lot warmer than the Lokoya vineyard. Lokoya sits on the edge of a gorge that a lot of the air that comes off of the bay kind of gets funneled over this gorge right into the Lokoya vineyard. And it's blocked, Keys is blocked by this little, you wouldn't call it a hill, it'd be like a hillock that kind of buffers it from that wind and that moisture and kind of moves it away. So it stays a little bit warmer and it stays out of the fog a little bit longer. So you had one Merlot that was really dark and brooding and with these tannins that were kind of broad. And then you had this other Merlot that was red and bright and floral. And I put them together and they made this really killer wine. I went to Jess, I'm like, Jess, I have this really great Merlot. And I said, I think it's as good as some of the Merlots that you see out of France and out of out of Italy. And I said that to him because he was very competitive, like me. And I knew that would get him going. And he said, he looks at me, and he was very much aware of the sideways phenomenon because he was dealing with it in his business as well. And he said, all right, listen, make the Merlot. Don't make a lot, but let's see what happens. So we made the Merlot. This is that very first Merlot that we made. And I'm super happy with how this wine is developing. This is a 20, or not 20, it's a 16-year-old wine. And it's a Merlot, and it's still got legs, and it still has a power to it. And I knew that it would. And I was, again, Merlot is really finicky. It's a really easy grape to grow, and that's why it became so popular, because it was really easy to grow. The industry thought it was the next white Zinfandel because it could make a lot of it. It's typically very soft, and it's it just made, and it's easy to say, So they planted it everywhere, and what I didn't realize was farm it the right way, you can get really green, really lean, and light characters. There was not a lot of depth or complexity to it. And that was a lot of the Merlot that was out there that the movie Sideways commented on. So we farmed it the way it should. We reduced the crop. We opened up the canopy to allow some sunlight in, and this is what we got. And we started at about 200 cases, and now we're up to about 1,000. So there was pretty good growth. Merlot still isn't taken off like Cabernet, but it's getting there. People are starting to recognize it, and I hope that we contributed a little bit to that recognition.
So you mentioned.
So Chris, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Greg.
No, real quick. Yeah. So you mentioned, we talked about Jess earlier, and the trust, in you. And then I love that competitive angle and how you kind of played that, played him that way as far as that, pitching this. Can you share like one other lesson? I'm sure there are countless, but one other lesson from him, like for me, for everyone on the screen, that you think about and you reflect on.
Yeah, well, Jess was, excuse me, where he saw his contribution to our company and the vision of this company was the idea of the importance of land. And not only land as an investment, because he saw the importance of that too, but land that would sustain the quality level that he demanded out of us as winemakers and out of the vineyard guys to produce these grapes. And he spent a lot of time in vineyards. When a new vineyard would come up, he'd be one of the first guys out there looking at it. And that understanding and that approach to winemaking into the wine industry is crucial. It's crucial to the success of Jackson Family Wines in general. We are resilient in the face of a lot of economic challenges because we've got these great properties that are part of our portfolio. We don't depend on somebody else farming. Probably, I buy fruit from other growers, and I have great relationships with growers around Napa Valley, but 90% of the fruit that I bring into the winery is from these great vineyards. And I talk about this, my competitive set, if you will, are wines like, in the Lokoya sphere, if you will, Colgan and Harlan and Chapelet and Bryant family, they're all really killer places. But they all really depend on one or two of these great vineyards. And they talk about those great. Screaming Eagle is a really good example. It's one vineyard. That's all they talk about. We have in our portfolio 7 or 8 Screaming Eagles. They're these just jewels, and that was all Jess and Jess's vision and he pounded that into you. And I've benefited over and over again. I think the company has too.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
So this is a great question. Besides your mountains, Chris, what is the best region to grow Merlot?
Well, you want a place, Merlot is another early ripener, right? So, but it needs a certain soil type and it needs a certain amount of sunlight. Sun drives a lot of the flavor compound changes in grapes. And if you have an intense sunlight, then you can create really intense flavors. You also need this combination of this really unique soil type. And if you ever go to Pomerol or to Bulgari where Merlot is grown, you kick under those vines and that soil is like this perfect clay loam, and very consistent. And that's the other thing with Merlot. It'll show those soil variations really quite markedly. And if you're growing one block and you have multiple soil types in that block, it can become a challenge. So again, I grow Merlot in Clarendon, in the McLaren Vale, which is a really ideal spot. I have an ideal block of Merlot there. Pomerol is a great place for Merlot. Bulgari, if I was ever making wine anywhere else but, or going to live somewhere anywhere else but Napa and McLaren Vale, Bulgari would be one of the places I would go. Those are great. And I'm sure there's others as well that I haven't yet explored. I was in a conversation with Laura Catena not too long ago, and she was brushing off Merlot. And I was like, Laura, you're growing great Malbec, you're growing great Cabernets, you have incredible vineyards where you grow in Argentina. You should be able to grow great Merlot down there. So I told her if she ever wants me to come down and help her out with that, I would do it. She hasn't invited me yet though. So anyway.
I think we actually have one. Michael is raising his hand here. And Michael, I just kind of sent you a quick little chat. I don't know, do you want to ask Chris or Greg a question personally, or would you like to type it? I do see your hand up, so if you're not shy, I'm happy to unmute you. You tell me, sir. Sorry, Michael, there you go.
There we go. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. I was trying to type the answer, but I think of these 4 wines. You talk about art earlier, which resonates, but what would be the ideal meal pairing for all 4 of those wines? Does something like this strike you? You're like, oh my gosh, if I could put this on the Barbie or whatever, what would it be?
You go first, Chris.
So I thought he was going to ask me something very different because Mike is an old high school chum of mine and one of my first roommates in Chicago when we got back from college. And he has a lot on me, so I was a little nervous when I saw this. Our wines pair well with the carnivore in you, if you will. I was thinking about, in fact, again, when I was tasting those 19s earlier today and then tasting this 13 Cab Franc, and we have sheep now in our vineyards here as part of our move to become more regenerative in our farming. Lamb would go really well with this.
They better be fast sheep.
Listen, when I made the deal with the herder to bring these sheep out here, I said, I'm going to give you some wine, and hopefully in the spring you'll remember that. And then the Merlot, man, like a mushroom risotto would go awesome with that Merlot the way it's tasting right now. And Tina's making this killer mushroom risotto these days. That would be like ideal for me.
Yeah, there's something I loved about that Merlot. Like there's something it like takes you in. There's like a dark depth and kind of foresty, dried leaf, kind of mushroomy vibe to it that I loved. Like it looks like that kind of food to me, like the wine does. Yeah, and for the Chardonnay and Pinot, really anything, I think, there's that kind of flinty, salty, almost like white flower jasmine vibe in the Chardonnay that like anything that, any food that would be cool with, and then with the Pinot, especially whole cluster Pinot, there's that herbal, spicy element to it aromatically. So again, thinking about like an accompaniment or condiment like rosemary or thyme or anything else, that the wine takes that spot, takes that role. So anytime you would think about that with whatever the food is, I think that wine would insert itself really well and kind of elevate the food. Great question.
I believe we have another, I may have George coming up here. Although somebody did say that mac and cheese probably would pair with everything for you guys. So well done, Mark.
It does. Mac and cheese and French fries. I mean, that's like the best with everything. And then all this is like secondary as far as options.
And I can tell you why Chris likes mac and cheese, but that I won't do that in a public setting.
So I'm going to unmute you, George. I'm asking you to unmute there. If you'd like to ask a question for the winemakers, feel free, please. You'll just have to unmute yourself.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is my greatest gift, what I have from Greg and Chris Carpenter. I was working with them for a long time. I told Jess, how you promoting Greg, Jess, is fantastic because he listened to me all the time. And I said, this guy working at Melville, but he will grow. So we should take him into our book. So Melville was part of the Regal Wine Company. Chris Carpenter was a quiet guy and did something spectacular there when I visited him. And now after many years, you too, still pure. Greg, we all remember your hose was more purely turned around in the winery than anyone else's.
There it is.
And comes the end. When I went to the tasting and I called that's a new world wine, but that's incredibly goes into the north of Burgundy. And we are talking about, I was thinking I'm stupid, but great wine critics did say the same things. What I'm saying is when you make purity winemaking techniques, when you believe how quality can be achieved, here is a two guy who already did it, and I just listening, and I will keep my mouth shut because they are bigger than me. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Scorecard.
Hey, George.
And I thought Carpenter was like God. Now that's like God's dad or something, speaking with a Hungarian accent. That was rad. Thank you, George, for being here.
So as we kind of wrap things up here, we've had some great chatter on the side chat there. So I'm hoping I got to most questions. I hope I got to most, things. Lots of compliments, gentlemen, on the wines, kind of just going back and forth. And I agree. This wine lineup was a lot of fun that you guys personally picked. So thanks for sharing some kind of like inside with that, and just those stories. It really meant a lot, and I know that having your time like this is big, and all of our collectors, thank you for joining us. So what I want to wrap it up by saying once again, thank you for everybody. The one thing to note is we do still have some of this wine available, whether it is in that set of all four or just single bottles in general. Obviously, the older it gets, the less we have. But feel free to reach out to me. Tyler, as I see just in the chat, put the link for any of the purchases as well. But all in all, I think this was once again a fantastic event. I think we learned a lot. It's fun to just hear chatter and not just technical mumbo jumbo that we're all going to forget tomorrow there. So it's really cool to see the personality of you two, and the personality definitely shows in the wines. I agree.
I have one question for you, Ryan. What is the product that you use in your hair that gets that so stiff, man? It's unbelievable.
It's
my friend.
Yeah. He's asking for a friend.
I am long overdue for a haircut, so I've got you could probably put like shish kebabs on right now. I definitely have a solid amount of for sure. That is true. Yeah, we can't all have beautiful curls like you, Mr. Carpenter, so I apologize.
Yeah. That's called humidity.
Yeah, we actually have it in Napa for once, huh?
Yeah.
But once again,
Thank you all.
so much for joining us, and really it means a lot every minute you give us, and we know that you've been supporting us for a very, very long time. So on behalf of Greg Brewer, Chris Carpenter, the Jackson family in general, thank you so much. We hope you all have a fantastic night.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
Thank you.